for students. And yeah, and today we are honored, very honored to have someone we all know. I'm sure we all know the host of Darknet Diaries, Jack Resider. And it's going to be a Q&A session. So please be as interactive as you can. He's here now. You can ask all the questions that you've always wanted to ask him. We did ask you beforehand to send some of the questions that just to keep things organized. But feel free if you have any extra questions, please feel free to raise your hand or post them in the chat, and we'll be sure Jack will answer them. Of course, it's a 1 hour webinar, so we'll try and get as much from him as we can. Jack, I think we can begin now, and I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, and as someone had requested, you tell us your journey in cybersecurity before Darknet Diaries.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. Well, I'm so honored to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me here. I remember meeting you, Laura, at DEF CON a few years ago, and it was so cool to learn about she hacks and what you're doing out there in Kenya. I'm just so inspired by you and amazed by what you're doing. So keep up the good work. So yeah, my name is Jack Resider. I was a security engineer for 10 years before starting my podcast. And what I got a degree in IT security, or in just IT in general, and I didn't find a good job that I liked after that. So I did lots of different jobs, not technical jobs. And then I went and I got a certification, a CCNA, Cisco Networking Associates certification, and that got me a job in a network operations center, monitoring networks for faults, problems, ports going down, bandwidth issues, services going down, stuff like that. And from there, I just went crazy getting as many certs as I could. I got my CCNP certs, and then there was a opening for a security engineer position. So I said, well, I'd like to be an engineer, not really knowing what the security aspect of it was. And so I moved, I applied for that, and they liked me. So they put me there, and I kept getting more certs, the CCNP security and a Juniper security and checkpoint security, certs like this. And I was in charge of handling firewalls and intrusion detection systems and SIEM tools and different security tools. But this was where I realized I love being, because in security, you really have to know a little bit about everything, and you have to really scratch your head to think about, wait, I remember this when I was in school. What's the first, what's inside a image when you first look at the first line of an image, when you just analyze it, what is it supposed to look like, and stuff like this. How does an operating system work, and a boot process, and all these different things that you would never think you need, but in the security world, all of a sudden it becomes important, because that's how the attack vector took place, and now you need to know how to secure it or lock it down or whatever. So yeah, that's where I ended up, and that's where I stayed for. I did that for 10 years, just managing the firewalls and for many different clients too. So I got to see networks in schools, government buildings, commercial buildings, and so many more. So it was a real big exposure to the whole security world, and that's when I was going to conferences and writing a blog and giving talks and getting my name out there. And after writing a blog for 7 years, I kind of had the confidence that I might be able to do something more. And I really liked podcasts. So I decided maybe I could do a podcast on like hacker stories or cybersecurity stories, not so much news and not so much interviews, but more stories, because I think there's some really good stories out there. And so that's when I started Darknet Diaries, the podcast. read some books on how to do a podcast and how to tell stories, and I took it from there. So yeah, I had an understanding of what was in the security world to know what stories to go after first, or what people to go after and talk to first. And that's what got me started. And yeah, it's just been going for 3 years now. The podcast has been my full-time job.
Awesome. I guess you've answered the second question, which is what made you start Darknet Diaries? Eve had a question, and she was asking, what does creating an episode entail?
The episodes take about 40 hours to make one episode, from 30 to 40 hours. So it sometimes takes me years just to find the guest. I've found guests and kept asking over and over and over, can you please be on my show? And they just don't reply. And eventually I get through. So sometimes that just takes a long time. But yeah, I have to find a really good guest, and I don't want just any guest. I want somebody who has that firsthand experience of being there when the hack took place. And then I want to find, get them recorded, to record the interview. And then I need to do more research on the story. If it's, something I can research, maybe there's, court cases or news articles that I can look into. And so I do some more research, and then I write my narration. And then I kind of stitch, I read the narration and then I stitch it together. So the narration goes in between the interview, and then I add the music. And then I probably do about another 3 rounds of editing and listening to it and saying, oh, wait, I don't like this part. I'm going to change it. And then I make some original artwork for everyone as well. I have an artist that does that. I come up with the idea and then give it to them to make it. So yeah, that's the whole process.
Oh, that's awesome. Doreen Ochung had a question, and she was asking, when you're researching a particular topic, how do you do your research, and how do you know who to reach out to for information?
Yeah, there's 3 ways that I find stories, primarily. So the first one is I pay attention to the news, and when there's something going on, I ask the person involved, are you able to talk about this, or when will you be able to talk about this? I'd love to interview you. So that's one way. Another thing is just well, I guess I have a few ways, more than 3. So I go to conferences and I listen to people talk, or I watch conferences. So there's probably, before COVID was here, there was probably like 3 or 4 or 5 conferences every month for IT security. And a lot of those are recorded that you can just watch on YouTube. So if you can't go to a conference, you can watch it, and then you can hear what these people are saying. And so I listen to a ton of talks, and I find people who have good stories, and I tell them, oh, I heard you talk here. Would you be able to tell me on the podcast? And then another thing I do is I have Google Alerts that tells me when a news article comes up with maybe the word biggest hack ever, or hacker sentenced. If the hacker gets sentenced, then we know that they got arrested, and we know what they did, and we have all these like extra details. So I like it when it's at the end of the story, and once the hacker gets sentenced, now we have the whole story. We know from the beginning all the way to the end. And then lastly, there are people who bring me stories now, which is really remarkable. People get out of prison, and then they contact me and say, I don't know who you are, but I've been told I need to tell you my story. And I'm like, okay, let's hear it. So those ones are really fun.
Awesome. So Eve, before I let you take the next question, Jack, you said sometimes an episode takes even 40 hours to create. And someone from the questions, from the form we sent out for questions, was asking, which episode did you take the longest time to make?
Okay, I think the one that may have took the longest, I think the Xbox Underground. There's 2 episodes there, and I had to Well, there was 4 people that I interviewed for that. So that's already takes a long time. I mean, to find all those people and get them to agree and then talk with them for hours and then put it all together. That was really probably the biggest task I've done for and that was actually ended up being 2 episodes, but still those 2 episodes combined was bigger than any other of the ones. It just took a long time. And the story was so complicated that I had to write it out on pieces of paper of, like a map of who knows who and what's the timeline and all the names of people. In that story, everyone had 3 names. They had their real name and their hacker name, and then the name that people called them like a nickname. So it was really complicated to like figure out who's talking about who and what's happening here. So it was just really tricky.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think you've answered the other question partially in terms of the concern was more, how do you get people to tell their story? As you mentioned that some reach out to you directly, and what other mode do you use to get different stories to be aired out? Because they're quite interesting stories that are documented out there.
Yeah. It's at first I was a bit worried to ask somebody, can you tell me about the worst time of your life? Because that's really what I'm asking them, like this is a really bad moment for you. Do you want to relive it? And I was really worried to ask these questions. But after I did it a few times, I realized that people who were, had these bad experiences never really got asked these questions before. And so it kind of felt relieving to them to have somebody actually, ask, how did that feel when the police knocked on your door? And what was your first thought that came in your head? And like these things that just nobody really asked them before. And so it felt good for them, kind of like a therapy session to just let it all out and get it out of their head, because it has been in their head and nobody has understood what they went through ever. And so it was just, it feels good to them, which is just so opposite than what I thought. It's like, I thought, I'd be putting somebody in a bad mood for interviewing them about this, but they come out of it feeling great and happier. It's strange.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And maybe a last one for that session. How do you now create a rapport with the different black hearts for the interviews that are on Darknet Diaries?
Yeah, it is pretty tricky. They some of these black hats, the people who are doing illegal things are skittish and they're not trustworthy, and they get scared when you say if you say the wrong thing to them or something, right? So you have to be careful on how you approach them and what you say. But I think they understand pretty quick that I'm just trying to document their story, and I'm not, I'll fact check it, and I'll call their friends or their family. And a couple times I've had somebody who has been committing cybercrime confess to me all this stuff, and I'm like, well, I want to talk to your parents, because they were living at home with their parents, and I asked them, is any of this true? And they said, well, they don't know anything about this. And I said, okay, well, they've got it, like, you're making a lot of money on this, so I'm just curious where they think your money's coming from. So yeah, it's interesting, kind of pushing the envelope a little bit too on these black hats, because it's hard to know if what they're saying is true or not. And so I need to do some kind of verification. And a lot of times not a lot of times, but a few times I've interviewed people, and there's no way for me to confirm that this story is true. So I just can't air it, because there's no way. They're claiming they did something that is just so unbelievable with no way to prove it, and I just can't bring myself to publish something like that. So there's a lot of fact checking that goes on too.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Over to you, Nancy.
Okay, thank you. I'm Nancy. I lead the campus program. So I think the question that I have are actually two. One is, how do you choose the stories that you air? And the second one is, are there stories that you felt maybe you are afraid to share them in your podcast?
Well, these are all good questions. The stories I choose, I am a storyteller. So the first thing I need is something that has a few twists and turns and is sort of long. So if, we're going in one direction, we think we know what's going to happen, and then the story takes a total different turn, and we're like, wait, I never would have guessed that's what's going to happen next. And that kind of keeps you there as a listener. You're like, wait, now I have no idea what's going to happen next. I have to listen to this. So I love story that has just a good sharp turn on it. If it has two or three, it's even better. And then one that has length, right? So if we talk about some breaking news story, I don't know much about that. It's all we know is that this one company got hit with ransomware or something, but the company isn't saying how they got hit with ransomware, or we don't know who the hackers are or what's the situation. So all we know is like, if I were to make a podcast on some breaking news, it would be like 1 minute worth of audio, there's just nothing there. We have one piece of information about what happened. So I need something that, we can go back and say, okay, let's establish who this person is and who this company is or something. And then we can start going down the path of what's normal for them. And then we can switch it over to, okay, this is the day everything changed. And they'll never forget that moment of, when everything fell apart or something, So those are those kind of ways I look for stories. And I like to pick stories that are kind of, some of them are social engineering, penetration tests. Some I interview black hat hackers. Some I interview people who got hacked. And some I interview real big cases like nation state attacks and stuff like that. And I can't find the nation state hackers or even the victims of this one. So often on those, I just have to research it myself.
Okay, hi, I'm Stella. I'm the technical lead at She Hacks. And one thing I'd like to know is what challenges do you face when approaching different people to share their stories from the different people you source the stories from? How do you overcome those challenges?
Yeah, it's difficult. I was very nervous at first, like asking people to be on a show that nobody knows about. That was very hard, and it was kind of like if I ask 10 people, one person would say yes. So it was a lot of ignoring me and a lot of yeah, I have stories, but I can't tell them. And I still get that today, where there's people who say, well, I'm under NDA. I can't, I can't say this. There's just too much personal stuff involved in this story or something like that. And they can't tell stories. But yeah, at first it was really 1 out of 10 that would say yes. But I think that was important to get that many no's or get that many, ignoring me, because it meant to me that I was in the right direction, that I was going for the right people, because those are the people who they have a tough time, explaining their. I want to bring you into this like secret world, this inner circle that you might not be able to just go and talk to these people, right? I want to get you access to a world that's just impossible for you to access. And so that's why it's okay for me to get so many no's, because I want to bring you to this special world that's just kind of out of reach of the average person. It's not like I can just, like, if my show was about doctors, you could go up to your doctor and ask the same questions that are on my show. So it's not so much out of reach, but my show's about about people who probably don't want to talk about what happened to them or so much, right? So yeah, that's kind of one of my goals as well, is to find people who just are just out of reach for the normal person.
The next question is, do you still do cybersecurity work aside from your podcast job?
I don't do it for work, but I do run the website for the podcast and some other services and servers. So, I've got to go through the security of, how is the website secure? Because if I'm making a story, a podcast about hackers and a website about hackers, there are people who are hitting that website all the time. So I've got to do some, I've got to make sure it's not embarrassing, right? So one of the things I do for the website is I make it in Jekyll, which is a static HTML website. So it's basically all of the website gets rendered on my computer, every HTML page, and then only that HTML gets uploaded to the web server. So there's no database on the back end. There's no users. There's no anything for anybody to do. There's no footprint or foothold for anyone to be able to get in and do anything, because even if they get in, they would see the same thing that's visible to the world. So there's no back end whatsoever. And I think that's a good practice for having a safe website, because if there's no database and there's no users, then there's nothing that they can do to get in there. I guess the worst could be is defacing it, which, it could go in and change an image or something if they knew my login to it or something like that. So that's the biggest thing I have to protect, is the login to the web server. So yeah, I mean, these are the things I think about. And I do practice some capture the flag type games every now and then, where I will go on to a VulnHub or something like that, get a vulnerable a VM of a system, and then try to exploit it just to practice a tool or something like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Eve again here, the fellow co-founder of SheHacks with Laura. And another question for you is, which is the best or worthwhile investment that you've made in cybersecurity?
The best investment?
Yes.
That's a good question. I like this one. I think the important thing is to always be like passionate and curious about the stuff you're working on. So if there is are we still here? Can you still hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. The screen changed for me. Like if you see something or if you learn something, this was important for me. Like when I was taking a class, is if they taught something, then it's not so much just, okay, I understand, and then let's go on to the next lesson. I would really want to slow down and say, wait a minute, I want to practice this. Where is there an area that I can practice this? Like, you told me how to use this tool, but I want to try changing that button there, or that option there, and try this with different things and stuff like that. So you really need to get in there and be curious about, would that work if we did it this way, or would that work if we did it this way, or whatever, and just try lots of different things. So I know it's not quite an investment, but this is, I think, an important thing that leads you to knowing, okay, where am I missing knowledge, or where? Okay, maybe we'll go with that one. As far as investments go, I think the investment would be, for me, was to learn something that the other people on the team didn't want to learn. So in my case, it was VPNs. When I joined my security team, nobody on the team was very good at configuring, troubleshooting, or setting up a VPN. So I decided, well, I will take the time, and it took me a few months to understand it, in detail, to know VPNs, how to configure it and troubleshoot it. And anytime that there's a VPN problem that my team gets, I want them to send it to me. And I told them this. I said, look, I'm really wanting to get good at VPNs. Please give me all of your VPN issues. And so what that did is it made me valuable to the team very quickly, so that all of a sudden they were like, oh, well, I hate doing these VPN problems. I will give it to Jack so he can take care of it. And I was helping my team. At the same time, I was filling in a gap on my team that they didn't have very strong on. They weren't very strong at VPN. So it made my whole team better. So the investment was stepping back, learning something difficult and hard that my team just didn't want to get involved with. And then that made me, a better team player. It made my team stronger, and it did all these extra things. So I think that was something I did early on in my engineering career that really, put me in a good trajectory for my career at that company.
That's great. Thank you, Jack. So we do have some, before we continue with the She Hacks organizing team, we do have some questions in the chat. And people, please feel free to keep posting your questions. If you want to speak out, you can raise your hand. It's in the reactions in the Zoom menu, and we'll ask you to speak out. But first, let me read some questions. There's a question by Nate. And he's asking, is there a specific story or episode that still keeps you up at night?
That keeps me up. I think once I'm done with it, I kind of am done with it. I'm not kept up by it. But I think that if there was going to be one, it would be these nation state hacking stuff, right? So like Russia is attacking all kinds of people, and it's scary. And Iran is attacking people, and the US is attacking people, and China's attacking, and they oftentimes it's so like it's a really big nation attacking maybe a little company, right? And so there's just no chance that little company is going to be able to defend against Russia or something like that. So I just feel like that is probably the scariest stuff for me right now is when a nation is attacking a company and not another nation. I don't mind when it's nation to nation attacking, right? So that's okay, because now you have the right infrastructure to defend against it. But when it's nation versus private company, it's just not fair. Like a private company isn't ever going to be able to defend against an entire nation's arsenal. So that's probably the one.
The other question we have in the chat is from John Courier. Have you ever been threatened or feel threatened for your life?
Not for my life, but there have been a few things that have kind of scared me. If you noticed, I have this strange filter in my video, and I think before I was making my podcast, there was and somebody liked it so much that they tried to figure out who I was and all this stuff. So they triangulated, or they looked in the video and they saw some features in the background, a mountain or something. And they looked for pictures of where that mountain might be in the world. And then they said, okay, he must be in this city. And then they kind of triangulated where my camera was to try to figure out where I was. And that put them at a specific house. And then they looked up the county records for my house, and they found my name. And then when they found my name, they found where I worked, and they just went all the way down the line. And then they messaged me at work. And I was like, this is really weird, all from a YouTube video. And so, and explained how they found me. And so I was really scared about that. And ever since then, I've taken my face off of the internet as best as I can. No YouTube video with my face, no facial appearances here and there. So it's kind of scared me, right? So if there's anything, it's this kind of thing where I don't like people trying to find who I am or anything like that, because I just want my private life to stay away from my public life as well. So there's just this barrier that I want to keep. So I think that's probably the one that scared me the most, as far as if somebody coming at me. It wasn't for my life, but it was just for my privacy.
Oh, that's awesome. I do have a follow-up question, or maybe a question that relates to that one. You have been very successful in keeping your identity disclosed, as you've mentioned. How difficult has that been for you?
I've got this book called Extreme Privacy by Michael Bazell, and that book is a great book for how to just be private on the internet. and how you can go about it. And Michael Bazzell even gives public talks and on stage, and he still doesn't have his photo out there. So he's doing a good job at like being kind of a step ahead of me on how to be a public figure and still be private. So I really give him a lot of credit to I read his books and I listen to his podcast, and that helps a lot.
That's nice. Kevin Mugo, you have a question?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Name is Kevin Mugo. Wish to ask a question. From your own experience and the podcast that you've been doing, what are some of the predictive dangers that you see that may arise in some future years in the short term, medium, and long term in the cybersecurity field? Thank you very much.
What are some of the problems that I see arising? What are some future issues? I think
Yes, especially.
okay. I think the growing threat of hacking is getting bigger, right? So it this year in particular, we've already seen some pretty big attacks, and I feel like it's just going to keep growing. So it seems like the trend, in my opinion, is that the attackers are getting more powerful and the defenders are having a really hard time keeping up with that. And when you even have people who are like nation state attackers who have a lot more resources, they can, hack into the supply chain and get into like we saw with a few attacks this year, where you get into the software company that makes the software, and then that gets pushed out to a whole bunch of different companies. Then you've got, that's called the supply chain attack. So now you've got hackers in hundreds of companies when they really just started in one, right? If they attack the source company that makes the software, then they can get into all the other companies. And so I think that that's probably going to continue, or we're going to see more stuff like that. I think the crypto coin space and cryptocurrency space is still really booming and fast growing. And so that's money, right? Cryptocurrency is money, and we're going to see a lot of attacks with the money. Exchanges are going to be attacked. And I heard about AfriCrypt being an exit scam recently, and that was a lot of money that got stolen. So there's definitely going to be a rise in that. And ransomware seems to be getting bigger as well. So it's just, these are the things that seem to be growing on my view. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Thanks for the question, Kevin.
Thank you, Jack. So maybe I'll continue with some questions from the chat. Grace Kino is asking, are there any consequences to your stories? For example, has any story you've told led to arrests or authorities coming after you?
Let me think. I don't think any consequences so far. There was one, because for the most part, when I do a story, it's already out there. I'm gathering news articles that have already been talked about, and I'm interviewing people that have usually already spoken somewhere. And so it's not that big of a news thing that I say, well, this is what happened. But there's a few that I do some research and I say, well, this is what I just noticed, and I looked into it and here's what I found. And so like, for instance, I did one where I found that there were people manipulating the Apple podcast charts, and they were kind of doing like a black hat marketing kind of thing. It's not so much a hack, but they were poisoning the data on the charts. So it's a strange way. If you were to say it's a hack, it's a different kind of hack. So I kind of pointed that out, and it turns out that the people at Apple all heard my episode and they contacted me to figure out, okay, what else do you know about this? Did you hold anything back from the episode so we can get in there and figure it out? And I gave them extra information, and yeah, it turns out that the people in Apple were all scrambling to try to figure out a way to fix it, because it was quite embarrassing for them when their charts didn't matter as much anymore, because that's what I was pointing out, that they're easily manipulated. So I think that's something that changed, but that's the only one I can think of right now. I'm hoping that that Kik gets kicked out of the App Store. That's my big goal.
That's so nice. I can tell that you're a true storyteller because we have so many questions, and I wonder if we'll finish by the time it's 8 East African time. Just to follow up on her question, she also asks, how has COVID or the changes it's brought affected what you talk about and how you approach those stories? More so, do you meet most interviewees face to face, or COVID made it permanently virtual?
Well, yeah, before it, I was mostly doing everything on the internet, Zoom calls and stuff like that. So it wasn't that big of a change for me to get interviews. I think more people were available. If anything, I had it easier access to people. They were less busy maybe, but I think the COVID stories are still coming out. I don't think we've hit them yet. I think when I'm a person who's kind of a slow news junkie and a slow news reporter, where COVID's happening, but do we know what all the hackers are doing around that, or how that's affecting business yet? We don't really know when we're in the middle of it, and it's only until we step back and say, okay, yeah, that's now a story I can tell. And that's something that we can share and all these kind of things, right? So people are not really happy to share right away. They kind of want to wait. So like some stories I was doing just this week where when there was a social engineer, a penetration tester trying to get into a building, they were doing it during COVID, and usually you can follow someone, you could tailgate someone into a building. You could just follow them through a door. Well, because everyone was working from home, they weren't able to do that. And so then they had another plan, maybe we'll follow someone who leaves for lunch and then try to, clone their badge when they're at lunch. Well, because COVID, they didn't want to go in the restaurant. They wanted to go through a drive-through or something. They had to just pick up the order and run out. They didn't stay for very long. So there was some issues that people had to deal with, and so that stuff is just now coming onto my radar of what it was like to be a social engineer during COVID. Because it's just too new when it's happening, right? So I only get these stories later on. So I think that's how the stories have changed, and I think the important ones are still to come. When people were using COVID as a way to fish people or get into their system somehow. Check your COVID results online, and you get an email like that. You want to see what it says, and so people were getting fished with that, but I haven't had those stories on my show, and I think those are still to come.
Okay, thank you. It's been insightful at this point. So Ben Chege asked a question: have you ever interviewed a story, but before it's airing, the owners recalled it?
Yes. There was a couple times that happened. There was an incident where it was the incident response team, so the defenders of the network were telling me a story, and then I aired it, actually put it out there, but then the hacker got arrested, and then there was a court case, and the court case, you have to bring in all this evidence. Well, here on my show, the defense, the IT defenders, the defense team, the incident responders were telling the public all the things that happened, how they investigated and all this stuff, which gave the hackers lawyer lots of information on what they can say may have been a mistake or something like that from from what they did. So they asked me to remove the interview from that one. And I did, because I wanted to be respectful. And what I did was I just put in my own narration, because the story was public enough that I could tell it, and it wasn't too big of a change. I always like it when people tell me their firsthand experiences, but this was fine. So that was one. Another one was just one that it was too sensitive at the time, and she thought it was going to be okay, but then when it's like some certain news hit the world, that it became too sensitive. It's too close to the current news, so she wanted to wait, and so we waited a year, and then we re-recorded the whole thing, and we did it again. So that one also just took a while. Like, it was all done, and I said, "Here we go, we're done." And she said, "No, actually, I let's wait." And so yeah, I had to wait.
Interesting. So someone else asked, what are some of the things you wish you had done differently when starting out in your career?
I think I wish I like, once I graduated university, I thought I was important. I thought I knew my stuff, right? And so I was looking for like that engineer role or something bigger. But I think I should have aimed lower and got a entry level position, which it just didn't make any sense to me that when you have a bachelor's degree, why would you go for an entry level position, right? But that's what I wish I did. I wish I was more humble and went for a smaller role and not for an engineer role, because that's why I had trouble finding a job, because I was expecting too much with that degree. And the thing is that when you have a degree, your ceiling in your role gets higher. So if I don't have a degree, I could still, either way, you start out on an entry level position. Either you have a degree or don't. And that's fine. But the person who doesn't have the degree has a certain, they can only go so high in that company. They can maybe get to senior level or something, but with a degree, you might be able to go higher, like architect level or management or something like that, right? So the degree just gives you that higher maximum that you could probably hit within the company, and it doesn't give you that starting that extra start. That's what I think got tripped up. So I wish I had just started my career earlier by coming out of university and getting whatever job I could get, and not being not waiting for like the bigger jobs.
Awesome. Eve, you had a question?
Oh, okay. No worries. Thank you so much, Jack. I have a question from Michael Felix, who is asking, have you thought of getting a few stories from the hacking communities in Africa? And if, as we have got some pretty cool stories around here.
Well, I don't always get to see what stories are going around there, because it's just out of view from me. So I would love, Michael, if you want to send me some stories that you think would be good ones for me to look into. I'd love to see that. The first ones that do come to mind are the Nigerian scammers. There's a lot of people who are sending emails from Nigeria to the US saying, your long lost relative is the Prince of Nigeria, and they want to send you inheritance. We just need $500 to send you this money or something like that. And so we see that a lot, and that's interesting, right? So there's something there. There's another big story in Nigeria that I was seeing, which was Emmanuel Nwudi, I think his name was, and he supposedly, it's hard to find the truth out there as well in Africa, but he supposedly social engineered his way to convince the bank to buy an airport for $170 million US dollars. And the bank gave him the money, but he never had any intention to build the airport. So he just social engineered, he scammed the bank to give him $100 million. And I think that's quite an interesting story. But yeah, and then I did see the story on AfriCrypt, the exit scam. But yeah, if you have other stories, please, anyone here actually, not just Michael, but if you think that there's a good story in Africa that I should be looking into, please send it to me.
That's awesome, Jack. It's actually funny how the Nigerian prince scam has become global. I remember back in 2017, a Nigerian prince, quote unquote, was arrested, and turns out it was a 72-year-old man from Louisville, Kentucky. So it's it has become a global thing. So we're gonna put you on the spot now. I'm following up with Michael Felix's question, and someone had asked in the chat beforehand. Have you interacted with the cybersecurity community in Africa before? And if not, is this something you see yourself doing besides, of course, today's session?
No, that's why I'm so excited to be part of this session, is because this is the first time that I've interacted with the African cybersecurity community, and I hope that this does give me, you know, an extra view, you know, ability to see more things that you see that I don't get to see.
Yeah, definitely. So someone asked, was it Stella or Doreen had asked before, as you continue to tell more stories, do you see an improvement in the way people and companies in general handle cybersecurity, mostly in terms of controls to prevent data breaches? Do you find that people are more aware of cybersecurity related risks?
I think I'm happy to see people turning on logs more. It's one of those things that when you don't have logs and then something happens, you don't have any way to go back to see what happened. But it seems to me that a lot of these incidents that I'm at least covering, I'm always surprised to hear like even a smaller company had logs enabled, because that's not always the case. A lot of companies just don't turn that on at all. They don't have the ability to store the logs or, you know, collect them in any way. So they just don't have that ability. And the device itself might not store it past a reboot or something like that, right? So it's kind of might just go away quickly, or it doesn't store it for a long time. So yeah, that's one thing I'm glad to see companies are doing a lot more of. And it's, yeah, I think for them, I think companies are doing a good job at securing themselves, because it seems like it could be a lot worse. And it seems to be still tricky for hackers to get in. Like they have to really deceive someone or find a very tricky exploit, and it's not as easy as just scanning and finding an exploit and getting in. Even people who are very skilled at this, like penetration testers, who start inside of a company, right? So the company might invite them in and say, yep, come on into our company and see if you can, from inside, you know, from a desk inside, from a network port inside, what can you access? And even these people have a really hard time getting somewhere, you know, to a system. So it's interesting that the systems are set up better and better all the time. You know, it's still possible with enough time and resources to get through all that and hack a company, but it's interesting to see that companies are doing pretty good.
Yeah, that's encouraging. If before you take the next question, we have a very interesting question in the chat from Melody, and she's asking, do you get to interview people who are behind bars?
I wanted to do this. I just haven't had a chance to figure it out. It's hard for me to find where the prison is, where that person is, and then schedule a time when I can I even talk to them? I don't even know how that works. So that's just something I need to figure out. But there are a few people who I definitely want to go visit and interview and talk with. Some of them are worried because they feel so mad about what happened to them with, you know, they got treated poorly in prison or something like that. And if they speak out, they might get even in more trouble in prison. So some of them might be a little bit worried to say stuff, but others, I think, that are in there for a very long time might be okay telling their story. So yeah, it's something I definitely want to do. Once COVID goes away, I'm going to try.
Thank you, Jack. Once again, I have a question from Emerald in terms of, do you have a favorite book for motivation, personal development, or enjoyment? And I like the word enjoyment. Yes, or any cool book that you can recommend to the different attendees.
Well, just a non-technical book, just any kind of book?
Any kind of book, yeah.
Well, I have been, I have a section on my website. It's darknetdiaries.com/books, which is a whole bunch of books on basically hacking stories, very similar to mine, right? So that's like one topic, but done for 8 hours on, and it's not a how to be technical or anything like that, but it's very fascinating to see, you know, you get into the mind of the hackers, right? So, you know, one is on Ross Ulbricht, the guy who started Silk Road, and it's fascinating to see all the stuff that he did to get that started and what he did when it was running and all these kind of things. So, you know, it's just really getting into the minds of these people are really fascinating to me. So I believe that one's called American Kingpin, and that one's really good. The one I read recently is This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends by Nicole Perlroth. I like that one a lot. I've been getting through some, with COVID, I've kind of stepped back and looked at philosophy some more. So I've been kind of going through some philosophical books. Like right now I'm reading the philosophies of Bruce Lee, the Kung Fu person. So it's just stuff like that I like. The TV show I think is Mr. Robot. That's the hacking show that I really like, and I'm sure everyone knows about that one. But that's really a good show.
Thank you, Jack. The story of Ross Ulbricht and the Silk Road is very, very interesting. So if you have time, guys, just go on YouTube and look for that story. So Nate, we have 10 more minutes to go, and we're hoping that we'll get to cover as many questions as we can. Nate, you had a question. Maybe you can unmute and ask.
Hello, Jack. My name is Nate. Yeah, really quick. I didn't want you to leave before you could mention. I do follow your show, so I do know about your Patreon. But I was wondering, how can we reach you, first of all, and also how can we support the show? Maybe you can let us all know.
Yeah, thanks for the question. You can find me anywhere you search for Darknet Diaries. You know, I'm in the podcast players and stuff, and Google, of course. And then on the website, darknetdiaries.com, is a email address. I think it's the About page. It has my email address, so you can email me there. But I also am pretty active on Twitter with open DMs. So if you message me on Twitter, I'll probably respond as well. And yeah, to support the show, just share it. That's what supports the best. Just tell your friends.
Awesome. Melody, you're saying there are two Kenyan hackers who hacked Fairfax County. An interview with them is my personal request. On that note, how can we place such requests?
Oh, I missed that question. What'd you say?
There are two Kenyan hackers who hacked Fairfax County. Their names are Robert Mutua Muli and Jeffrey Seiler. An interview with them is Melody's personal request, and she's asking how she can place such requests.
Okay, well, I will copy this and look into this. I did not know about this, so I will look into it. Thanks for sharing that with me, Melody.
Awesome. So Stella, is there any question I missed from the chat?
Somebody asked if I covered the story on Cicada 3301. Not yet. I'm still looking for the right person to interview for that one. I thought I had someone, but they disappeared on me. So yeah, it's just a matter of time on that one.
So I have one more. There's one concern in terms of why are hackers or cyber offenders jailed for longer sentences, generally in US compared to other countries, like the case of Ross Ulbright.
Yes, good question. That's tricky, isn't it? I think in the US, they have a really I think the prosecution here is just confused on how to handle criminals. A lot of criminals are put in prison for, I think it's just across the board. It's not just for hackers, right? So like a drug offense, you're going to be put in prison for a long time here versus in Europe, much longer. A violent offense, same thing. So I mean, even if you compare like the US prisons to the Swedish prisons, you've got Swedish prisons, they let you go on the weekends, right? And then you come back on the weekdays. So it's like a very different, view of how prisons are. And in the US, prisons are private. They're not government ran. So it's a for-profit company that has the prisons, that runs the prison. So of course they want more prisoners and they want bigger prisons and they want all these things because they're there to make money. So it's a strange industry, and it might result in people getting longer sentences than what they really need. I think that there's way to rehabilitate criminal hackers to make them more productive in society, but we just haven't been going on that path yet.
Okay, so I have one more question from myself. I don't know if I asked this before, but we live in a country where cybersecurity is still very young, and there's still a lot of misconceptions around what we do as people in the industry. There's also taboo when it comes to speaking about cybersecurity incidents. There's this culture where organizations or people don't really talk about it. And I wanted to ask, how can we share our stories in such a way that we do not glorify black hat hacking, but rather we create awareness and we encourage more conversation about everything cybersecurity. And I mean everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
I think everyone should be blogging. I like the idea of sharing your knowledge, sharing your experiences with the world through a blog. It's very simple to do. You just kind of write down what happened. A lot of people are worried that if they say too much, then they might be in trouble. So don't say too much, right? So say, you can, I've blogged about a lot of problems I faced at work, but I didn't say the customer that I was, having this problem with. I changed the IP addresses for the customer. I changed, names of everything so that it was still a matter of like, let's focus on the problem and not the person. Like, this is the problem we faced and this is how we solved it, right? So I think that's what everyone wants to know is, I've got this problem, how do I solve it? And if you're sharing that with the world, then that's going to help the world become, more effective at solving problems. And that was, like I said, that's what I was doing. I was blogging for a long time, and I was getting people, total strangers, saying, hey, thank you for sharing this with me, because I looked everywhere for answers to this and I couldn't find it except for your blog. So thank you so much. So you get recognition, and there's something nice, fuzzy, warm feeling for sharing your stories with the world. So I think everyone should be blogging about what you're doing in technical, even if you're just starting out, because it can be a great place to just store your notes for the future of lessons you've learned and stuff like that.
Well, thank you for that. I'm not sure if you mentioned whether you'll cover the SolarWinds story and the Paul Leroux story.
Not yet. That's something I think we're still learning more about. So I plan to do it someday, but not yet. Paul Leroux, I don't think I'll cover, but there's a great episode on Reply All that does cover that. Another podcast.
Just come again about the podcast so that we can follow it.
Well, Paul Leroux has a book out, so you can read his book, but there's also a podcast called Reply All that covers Paul Leroux's story.
Okay, thank you for that. So a lady called Anne is asking, how does Darknet Diaries handle some sensitive information that should not be released to the public yet, and still plays a key role in joining the dots in a case?
Yeah, I mean, in my case, I want to fact check things. So I'll want the extra information, people's names, court records, companies' names, whatever, just so that I can confirm the story. But we can always leave that out of the public story. So when I do publish it, sometimes I have to publish stories that have zero sources, just because I'm that person doesn't want that information out, or something like that. So it's just one of those things that I respect the person who's telling me the story and say, okay, look here, I don't want to cross any lines with you. And that's one thing to do. Another time I might be exposing a company or a group, and I'm like, look, I want to interview you because I want to expose, I want to cross that line. And oftentimes they say no, but that's a different story, right? That's something where I want to get to the truth and not so much just tell the story. Because I think the story itself is often better than the people or the places that were involved with it, because the story can just speak for itself. So we don't necessarily need the names and the places for everything.
Thank you, Jack. I have 2 additional questions. What do you do on your free time when you're not putting together the different stories on Darknet Diaries? And secondly, what are the limits of free speech in the US?
On my free time, I've been playing guitar and some video games. And then free speech, that's a strange one, right? It seems like the US is all about free speech, but there are lots of limits. You can't do things like claim that you own this song, but it's not your song. I can't play, songs on my show that are other people's songs, because that's the copyright issue, right? So there's that already. I can't say bad things about people that aren't true, right? So if I call the president, like accuse him of doing something that isn't true, I can be in trouble for that. And there's other things where you can threaten people with very serious threats, and that can be illegal. So yeah, there's a lot of things that aren't you're not allowed to say in the US. And I don't know all the details of it, but that's the beginning of it.
That's still quite insightful. Maybe a last one, an additional one for me. What's your point of view in terms of Twitter or generally social media? A social media companies censoring or canceling people, like the case of Trump, or getting kicked out of Twitter?
Well, these companies all have a policy, right? They have a fair use policy. They have rules. And, like for Facebook, you can't have nudity. That's one of the rules on Facebook. And so if somebody posts nudity, they have to remove that image, because that's just part of the rules. And the rules have changed over time. They fought with, mothers nursing. Is that okay? Because there might be some nudity there, because the baby is nursing on the breast or something. And so it's not so much nudity as it's just part of life at that point. And so there was some controversy around that, so they had to change it to, okay, the nudity, as long as the kid is 3 years or older or something, they modified it, right? So just things change over time, but it's the rules that those websites have that they've made. And if somebody's breaking the rule, then they have to, deal with the consequences of it. So that's just the way we have to work with it. And on social media is they have their rules and they enforce them. And it doesn't matter if you're the president or not. If you break the rules, you should be treated like other people.
Yeah, that's very right, Jack. And we hope to see people take responsibility or accountability for what they say online. And I wish to see an environment where we are all equal. So I know we're running out of time, but I want to, if it's okay with you, Jack, there's one more question from Nate I want to read out. But for anyone else who maybe has a question, you can join the Darknet Diaries Discord. There's a channel called Ask Jack, and you can ask, I hope that's the correct information,
Yeah,
Jack.
that's great.
You can ask him any question. So Nate has a question. Are there future plans for Darknet Diaries, movie, docuseries, political endeavors maybe?
Political endeavors. I'm not running for president or anything like that. I'm somebody who's a creator, and so I'll definitely be always creating something new. I like the idea of a book at some point. I like the idea of another podcast. I like the idea of more YouTube videos. I'm experimenting with that right now. So yeah, there's definitely some more stuff coming. I don't know what yet. A lot of times this is just trial and error. I put something together and see if it works, and if so, I'll keep doing it. But the movie companies have called many times, but I haven't quite found somebody who has the vision that I like. It seems to be more. It seems like they putting together something boring to me, right? And I want something more exciting. So yeah, I just haven't found the right person, but that's a lot of work once I do, because then I've got to go to Hollywood and work with them and figure it out and all this kind of stuff. So I'm not sure I'm ready for that. But yeah, there's lots more stuff coming out someday. I don't know when.
All right. Papsi, I know you had asked this question beforehand, and we don't want to leave the chat before having Jack answer it. You're saying you wanted to know if it's possible to start an APT hacking group in Africa. I think you had specified that before. If so, how do you get the government involved and the terms of finances and the law?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. I love this question. I'm gonna screenshot that one. This is I don't know. I do know that there's some groups in like China and Iran that aren't really affiliated with the government, right? So they're not government groups, but they have made their own team, and then the government has given them permission. So the government might give them objectives, or the government gives them permission to do things, because like in China there's a firewall and they can't get through, but the government can say, okay, we'll open it up for you because you are really helping the motherland. I think what might be a good approach for this is to build a maybe a penetration testing team. Something is like a normal group of hackers, and then start asking the government for contracts and say, look, we are really good at attacking, or we've been penetration testing for a few years, whatever. Do you have any sort of secret missions that you would like us to do, because we're the team that can do this. You've already worked together, and how to like get into stuff and this kind of thing for companies, but now you might want to ask the government. So yeah, I don't know if that helps or not, but that might be a way in.
Thank you so much, Jack. And the final question from my end is, from your story, you've taken years doing blogs and podcasts, years and years. And from your example of how you get so many no's, how do you keep going? Where do you get that stamina, to be honest?
Mm-hmm.
Majority of people give up.
Yeah, I'm not one that just gives up easy. I don't know, maybe it's in my blood, but I think it's just a matter of wanting that. When you get defeated, you have to step back and look at what your goal is, and you have to imagine yourself accomplishing your goal. And if you can do that, then gives you motivation to keep going, right? So when you feel defeated, just go and look at that big picture again of what you really, really want. And I really wanted, this to be a special thing for a lot of people. I felt early on, I felt that people were really liking it. And so I thought, okay, this could be big if I can keep it going. All right. So it was just a matter of finding people who were excited to see the next one, and me wanting to have it become, and all these things. And that kept me going.
Thank you, Jack, and thank you, Stella. Anything else from the team, Eve, before you close? Okay, I think I can take it. All right,
Okay.
all right.
Let me just take it. There was one last question in terms of how did you come to closing out the Bangladesh story? How did you go about it? And I think that was the key concern.
Yeah, there's a reporter in the UK named Jeff White who covered that story in detail. And so when I came across it, I came across his research on it. And that's who I reached out to get the interview, because we don't know, the hackers were in North Korea and all this kind of stuff. So I couldn't interview them. So I interviewed the journalist who researched it the most. I figured that's the second best is somebody who's researched this the most. And that's how I covered that one.
Thank you so much, Jack. It has been very insightful. I'm sorry we took 10 more minutes of your time. But yeah, it's been a very interactive session and we've learned a lot from you. And I can speak for the community saying personally, I enjoy your podcast so much. My favorite one has to be, I forget the name, but it's the one where there was North Korea defector. I think that was episode 71. And also Jenny, and we had Jenny Radcliffe in one of our sessions like 3 weeks ago. So we're learning more from the session, the podcast, and we're also getting to know more people in the industry through it. So thank you so much. As I mentioned before, if you have any more questions, please do reach out, join the Darknet Diaries Discord, and you will get to interact one-on-one with Jack and also other members from the Discord. Yes, so thank you so much, Jack, and thank you everyone for joining. And I hope that we'll continue interacting and just talking to one another.
Yes, thank you so much for having me here. This was such a treat, very enjoyable.
Yes. Yeah, I hope you've learned something about the community, Jack. Please just keep in touch with us. We are still growing, and we hope that one day a lot of us will be able to attend DEF CON and other events that all these cool people are.
Okay.
Yeah, so guys, I think that's it. Do have a good night. We're going to share the link to the Discord in our various channels, so be on the lookout for that. And yeah, have a good night.
You too.
Oh yeah, Jack has shared it. So good night.